Warning: this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Give us 1 hour and we'll help you change the way you think about happiness. Harvesting Happiness with Lisa Cypers Kamen is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Each week, Lisa spotlights diverse trendsetters and change agents who are the greatest contemporary thinkers and doers, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. Your host, Lisa Cypers Kamen, is a widely recognized applied positive psychology expert, author, documentary filmmaker, and lecturer specializing in optimal lifestyle management. Let's get to it. Here's Lisa.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where you will learn about psychological fitness and managing our minds. My first guest is Dr. Gregory S. Brown. He is an integrative psychiatrist, mental health writer, and author. His commentary has appeared in the New York Times, the Huffington Post, Psychology Today, on The Today Show, and on NPR. He is an advisory board member for Men's Health magazine, where he regularly contributes content for mental health stories. And he is the author of The Self-Healing Mind, an essential 5-step practice for overcoming anxiety and depression and revitalizing your life. Welcome, Dr. Brown. Thanks for sharing part of your day with me.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for having me. Happy to be here.
Oh, I'm always happy to talk about how we can help ourselves heal from depression and how we can bolster and improve our mental health. You and I share something in common with past battles with the dark cloud, as I like to call it.
Yep.
So let's talk about how depression and anxieties impede our decision-making abilities.
Well, I mean, the thing about depression and anxiety both is that they're very common mental illnesses. Anxiety is one of the most common, if not the most common mental illness in the world. About 40 million Americans every year struggle with anxiety, and depression is not far behind. And both of these conditions can make it difficult for us to make decisions, for us to think clearly, for us to function as we'd like, interact with our family and friends. And that's why it's important that we have these types of conversations, because a lot of people, as you know, Lisa, who are struggling with these conditions don't necessarily get the help that they need. So that's why these conversations are important.
And they don't often get the help that they need because there is a stigma up until now, I think. I think we're doing a better job of validating and normalizing the need to take care of our mental health. But there's a stigma around like us not being able to handle our affairs.
Right. And I think that stigma is definitely one of the major issues that's prevented people from getting professional mental health care in the past. I think we're doing a lot better job about that recently with destigmatization campaigns. You know, Prince Harry has come out and talked about mental health struggles. You have other celebrities and influencers who have done the same. But there are also other problems like access to care, cost of therapy that also prevent people from accessing that professional mental health care.
And then when we talk about self-care, this is where we really can take control of our lives. What are the 5 pillars of self-care?
So in my book, The Self-Healing Mind, I spent a lot of time discussing these 5 pillars: sleep, spirituality, nutrition, breath work, and movement. And Lisa, through working with thousands of patients in my clinic, I have come to understand that it's not just medications and talk therapy, although those are definitely important, but it's those self-care pillars that are also important for helping us overcome or get through any mental health care challenge.
And I would also argue and support that these 5 pillars protect our overall health care, that it's not just the mental health. It is how we can bulletproof all of our health.
Well, listen, I mean, people have heard me say this before, and I'll say it again on your show. Mental health is health.
Yes.
I mean, they're the same, right? And so I think that, if we are paying attention to these self-care strategies, just like you said, we're not only improving our mental health, but we are potentially improving our physical health as well.
Let's go back to depression and anxiety and how it affects our bodies, because I would love our listeners to have a mental picture of this. If you think about the area above your eyes as being the dashboard or the control center of our executive functioning, and when we are in anxiety and when we are in depression, that prefrontal cortex area is not as effective in being able to make those decisions. And why is that?
I mean, that's absolutely right. So the prefrontal cortex, there are different parts of the brain that are implicated when you're talking about mental illnesses. The prefrontal cortex, the limbic system, the amygdala, which is responsible for anxiety and our fear response. It's like they're all just disjointed, not communicating with each other effectively. We take moments for self-care, even if it means a mindfulness activity or taking time for intentional breath. What we're in a sense doing is we're allowing these different parts of the brain to communicate with each other better. We're allowing important neurotransmitters like GABA, which are responsible for helping us calm down, slow down, and relax, to really work as effectively as they can to help us feel better and get through the day.
So we're talking about strengthening the muscle tone of the brain, really.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, and some people actually refer to improving our mental health as mental fitness, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think if we can approach mental health the same way as we do physical health, going to the gym, exercising our body, I mean, the way we do that with the mind is by really focusing on these 5 pillars for self-care, exercising our mind. It really can make a huge difference.
So what would you say to somebody when you say to them, it would be really great for you to have some movement, or it would be really great for you to focus on a little bit of your breathing, and they look at you with sort of that blank stare?
That happens every single day. I'm totally used to that look. Yeah. Yeah. What I would say to them, Lisa, people have to, first of all, understand that when we're talking about self-care, we're not just talking about the bubble baths and the ritzy massages. A lot of people say to me, how can I go to the kitchen and make a kale and Swiss chard salad when I'm too depressed to even get out of the bed in the morning, right? So what I'd say is start where you can, right? So self-care, in my view, is like oxygen. It's like food. It's so vital for us to survive and for us to thrive. And, even something like incorporating a little bit of movement into your day, even if that just means walking to the mailbox or doing some simple stretches in your chair, right? Or learning to improve your diet by making it just a little bit more Mediterranean, right? Adding pumpkin seeds to your favorite salad, right? Or your favorite dish, without feeling like you totally have to revamp your life, I think is the best way to start.
Let's talk a little bit about getting out of the house and the value of being out in the sunshine, because there's medicinal value in that sunshine.
Right. So the first thing is that, being out in the sun, being exposed to sunlight is a great way to convert vitamin D into its active form. And we understand, or learning more about the fact that vitamin D is correlated with our mood, right? And it's one of the most prevalent vitamin deficiencies in the world, right? And so spending some time outside can help with that. The other thing is just being outside. Again, we're assuming that if we're outside, we're moving our bodies, right? And moving our bodies can actually increase the expression of a protein called BDNF, which is kind of like a natural fertilizer in the brain. It allows our neurons to communicate with each other more efficiently, and it's been associated with a boost in mood as well.
And there have been studies done, and I'm thinking about that Japanese study that was done some years ago about nature bathing and the impact of being outside in nature in an effort to reduce suicide in the country of Japan, and how successful that was.
Right. And I wouldn't be surprised, just because, as we've mentioned, being outside, moving our body, focusing on mindfulness-based activities. This is not pseudoscience. This is evidence-based medicine. And I think anyone who's listening to this, who has either struggled with a mental illness, or anyone who's listening to this who has a brain, which is everyone, should really focus on these self-care pillars, because it's so important for the way that we live, work, love, and interact with each other.
Well, and Dr. Brown is prescribing it, like right here and now. You're doing
I totally am. Yep.
An audible
Doctor's
prescription. Like move your body, eat well, sleep well, play well, breathe well, and feel better. It's not rocket science. But then again, it's so simple that sometimes the simple things are really hard to do.
Right. And so the thing that I really focused on highlighting in my book, The Self-Healing Mind, is how we can each develop a playbook for, accessing these self-care pillars. Because, it's easy to tell someone, hey, take deep breaths, or get better sleep, or eat better. But a lot of us are like, where do I even start? It seems so easy. And so the thing that I point out in the book is that, there are specific strategies that we can actually access so that we can really pay attention to these self-care pillars that can help our everyday experience.
And I think one of the other elements or angles that your book, The Self-Healing Mind, presents is regarding men and mental health. And we're going to take a break in a minute. And when we come back, I want to really touch upon that, because our show, we have a lot of women, mostly women, but there are some guys. But how can we help our husbands, our sons, our lovers, our brothers, and our friends access this mental health care in such a way, or with the same passion they approach their work or their bodybuilding? There's kind of a disconnect there, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, Lisa, that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book. So when I was in my early 20s, I was a young guy who was struggling with depression, and there wasn't a book like this around back then. I was very resistant to the idea of professional mental health care. I remember my mom took me to a therapist. I actually walked out of a couple of those sessions because I just didn't feel comfortable being there. I didn't know what to say. And so I'm hoping that this book can reach as many people as possible. And, for women who are listening to this, who have a guy in their life, whether it's their son or dad or husband, that they think will benefit from this message, go out and get this book and give it to them as a gift, because you never know. Reading through this might be that catalyst that really, encourages that man in your life to get professional mental health care if that's what they need.
Let's take a pause. And when we come back, we will continue the conversation with Dr. Gregory Scott Brown. To learn more about Dr. Brown and his work, please visit GregoryScottBrown.com. You can find him on Twitter at Gregory S. Brown, MD. And that's the same handle on Facebook and Instagram, Gregory S. Brown, MD. We're talking about the self-healing mind, an essential 5-step practice for overcoming anxiety and depression and revitalizing your life. We'll be right back, and that is a promise. Hang on just a second here. Before we take that break, I want to remind everyone about how joyful Good Hair Days makes us feel. These days, I'm treating my lovely locks that have been stressed by time and hormones with some extra TLC, and I can't wait to tell you about Ouai's new hair care products that help to reduce the appearance of shedding and to strengthen my strands. Ouai's new scalp serum and thick and full supplements are a complete solution that promotes fuller looking, healthier feeling, and happier hair from the outside in and from the inside out. Ouai is an easy and effective go-to hair and scalp health regime because good hair care demands more than just styling. Treat yourself, your scalp, and your hair with the same attention you give to your face. Consistency and time are key for these products to work their magic. A minimum of 90 days of use of Ouai's synergistic system is recommended for best results. I've made Ouai's regime part of my morning routine for the past few weeks, and I'm seeing and feeling an improvement in my overall hair health. That means a clearer scalp and stronger strands. Ouai Scalp Serum is a leave-in product that contains skincare-inspired ingredients such as hyaluronic acid and adaptogens that are safe for both color and chemically treated hair. It can be used on wet or dry hair to soothe irritation by hydrating and balancing the scalp. Ouai Thick and Full supplements are a 1-a-day supplement with 0 flavor that help improve overall hair health with beauty-boosting ingredients such as biotin and pea shoot extract that support thicker, fuller, and healthier-looking tresses. Both products are also vegan, gluten-free, and cruelty-free. Grow all the way with Whey's scalp serum and thick and full supplements. Go to THEOUAI.com and use code HH to get 15% off your entire purchase. That's 15% off your entire order at THEOUAI.com, code HH. Now let's take that pause. We'll be right back.
To learn more about cultivating sustainable well-being at home and the office, visit harvestinghappiness.com and explore Lisa's experiential on-site brain fitness workshops, corporate programming, and speaking engagement services.
And we're back. We're talking about psychological fitness and managing our minds. Let's get back to the conversation with my guest today, Dr. Gregory S. Brown. So at the break, Dr. Brown, you and I were having a good giggle about how to approach the man in your life when their mental health could use a little tune-up.
Right. And so what we mentioned, I don't think this is too far off. I mean, sometimes you have to mansplain things for us guys a little bit, right?
Yes.
So, mental health sometimes it's kind of like having a flat tire or needing an oil change or tune up in your car. I think the more that guys can understand that mental health, again, is something that impacts every aspect of our life, right? That if we are more mindful, then we are more efficient at work. If we are more present, then we're able to be a better dad or a better spouse or a better lover. I mean, these things are important for guys. And I think that, helping guys understand their importance can really encourage them to pay better attention to their mental health.
I know I was flashing, as you were describing this, I'm flashing on some video that was made, YouTube video that went viral a few years ago called It's Not About the Nail. And I don't know if you recall it, but it's a man and woman sitting on the sofa, and the woman is talking to her spouse or partner about how hard something was. And she's going on and on about it's just so hard. And how men want to fix it and women just want their guys just to listen. And then suddenly you see her profile and she's got a nail sticking out of her forehead. And he's telling her, trying to tell her, if you just remove the nail, the problem will be solved. Well, it's kind of that in reverse, right?
Right. And the other thing, Lisa, that I just want to spend some time talking about, here's a lot of men who struggle with mental illnesses, whether it's depression or anxiety. They have a hard time identifying it as that. So many guys that I treat in my practice will come in and they'll tell me, I'm drinking too much. I need you to help me cut back on alcohol. And after that third or fourth session, I realized the reason they're drinking so much is because they're depressed and they haven't really talked to anyone or processed that with anyone. Or other guys will come in and they'll say, I think I have ADHD. Can you give me a stimulant that will, get rid of it, that will fix it, help me be more productive, right? And again, 2 or 3 sessions in, and I realized what the real issue is that they're anxious and they don't really understand the signs of anxiety and how that can impact concentration. So again, through conversations like this and sharing these conversations, I think it can help all of us, man or woman, understand mental health, what it looks like, and how we can treat it.
I also think that the element of not being alone. I know that when I went through a mental health crisis, if you will, I was 30 years old. It lasted a year, and I felt very alone going into it, Right. And then once I realized that I wasn't alone, and this does happen to people when they go through major upheavals in their lives and traumatic events, being able to talk about it and normalize and validate that, yes, when we go through things, it is actually normal to feel these things. If we don't feel these things, we bottle it up, we store it away, and then it appears 20 or 30 years later.
And that's why, I spend so much time and effort in my own work, sharing my story. I am a psychiatrist. I treat depression, but I've also experienced it, right? I mean, and just because I have a medical degree or I've written a book or, do this type of wellness advocacy work doesn't mean that, I'm not at risk for these same conditions that millions of people in the United States and around the world face as well. Now, my message here that I want people to hear is that this is a hopeful conversation, because people can get better, right? And they do get better. And it all starts with having those productive conversations about how you feel. The worst thing you can do is to suffer in silence.
Yeah. And the suffering in silence, as many people do, is scary and it's sad and it actually exacerbates the condition.
That's totally right. And the other thing is, if you're a caregiver of someone who is struggling with depression, especially if you're a woman taking care of a man in your life, one of the ways that depression manifests in men and in adolescents, I should say, of both genders, is irritability. And so, right, guys can get cranky. They can, reject your love. They can try to push you away. And it's not them, it's the depression that is causing them to behave that way. And so what often happens is, a guy is pushing you out of his life, and then that leads to more isolation and just exacerbates the condition. So the best thing that you can do, if you're taking care of a guy in your life who's struggling with depression, is to, number one, encourage professional help. And the other thing you got to do is to smother that guy with as much love and compassion as you possibly can.
Yeah. I think that is one of the secret sauces here. That's the sixth pillar, the sixth element,
Number 6, right?
Number 6, love wildly,
Yeah. I'll have to include that in the self-healing mind part too, right?
Yes. And I think so. I do think that is the secret salve to this too, is that is high quality love. It's not just if someone says, "Oh, I love you." Of course I love you. You're my partner. But it is how do we show and express and nurture that love to the people closest to us, especially when they're hurting.
Right. And I'll tell you, it's not easy. So I don't want to pretend like it's an easy process. Especially when depression is telling you a bunch of lies and being mean to you and pushing you away. But, even as a psychiatrist, sometimes I'm on the receiving end of that from my patients who are trying to push me away. But, the longer you can hang in there, you notice that at the end of that, when people do ultimately get better, they are so grateful to you for not abandoning them through that process.
And I think we should emphasize that depression is so treatable. Anxiety is so treatable.
Yes.
It's like if you have a headache and you take Tylenol or aspirin or drink a strong cup of coffee, that's going to help the headache go away. Well, the same is true in this mental health sphere too.
And we don't spend enough time talking about that, Lisa. I mean, when people...
Well,
when
we
people
are. You and me.
But when people think about it, people think about mental health or mental illness. I mean, the things that come to mind are depression, anxiety, suicide, maybe derogatory words like crazy or insane. I mean, we don't think about hope. We don't think about living with purpose and balance and contentment, right?
Oh.
And those are the things that I think we need to focus on when it comes to mental health, because that really applies to everyone in the world, regardless of whether or not you've been diagnosed with a mental illness.
Well, that's now the seventh pillar. Is the meaningful work, right? Like being of use to society,
right? Right.
And that is a huge antidepressant, actually.
It totally is. It totally is, right? And I think that the more time we can spend really focused on living with purpose, balance, contentment, and hope, the better off we'll be, and not only today, but tomorrow and in the years to come.
Agreed. And also how we teach our children. As a formerly depressed person, I know that impacted the way I parented my kids and how I made conversation about feelings important. And I suspect that this is how we change the legacy also around mental health.
And we're seeing more people, more parents and more teachers, really pay attention to the importance of social and emotional learning. Education, I guess, from an early age. And so there are a couple of groups in Austin where I spent some time where my clinic is based that that actually focus on that, focus on after school programs, focus on education, because again, I think that it's important that our children, as they grow up, understand their emotions, learn how to talk about them, because I don't think that it's always innate. It's something that we really have to be intentional about teaching.
Yeah. I would love to hang out with you again. Like we have so much more to talk about, and we will do it, because I think that these conversations help heal. Before we go off, I want to just remind everybody that, if you don't have access to mental health care in your direct community, that COVID has given us the gift of telehealth now being a very normal part of healthcare practices. Whether you have insurance or you don't have insurance, there is access for everybody now. And I think that has been the upside of the plague, if you will, Right. Yeah. I mean, and the thing about it is, just like we were saying earlier, if you are struggling and you're having trouble accessing a mental health care professional, I mean, there's so many places that you can reach out to. I mean, psychologytoday.com is a great resource. Calling your local university and asking them for referrals is another resource. And as you mentioned, Lisa, so many of us are in the telehealth world these days. So that actually expands access to care as well. Dr. Gregory Scott Brown, you are an angel. I can't wait to hang out with you again.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Yeah.
I highly recommend this book, The Self-Healing Mind, an essential 5-step practice for overcoming anxiety and depression and revitalizing your life. Please give it to anybody in your life, not just the guys in your life. I think everybody can benefit from this book and learn how to take better care of ourselves. To learn more, please visit GregoryScottBrown.com, on Twitter at Gregory S. Brown MD, and the same goes for Facebook and Instagram. That's Gregory S. Brown MD.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here. Here comes that quick pause. We'll be right back, and that is a guarantee.
Did you know that happiness is actually good for your health? Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Connect with us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness, and follow Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen for a daily dose of inspiration.
Welcome back. We're talking about psychological fitness and managing our minds today. My next guest is Dr. Joan Rosenberg. She is a psychologist, a best-selling author, corporate wellness consultant, and media expert who is known globally as an acclaimed speaker and trainer on communication, confidence, resilience, authenticity, and grief. As a 3-time TEDx speaker and member of the Association of Transformational Leaders, she has been recognized for her innovative emotional mastery and confidence-building approach, and for her thought leadership and global influence in personal development. Dr. Rosenberg has served as a mental health media consultant for documentaries, print, radio, television, and digital outlets. She's also the author of 90 Seconds to a Life You Love: How to Master Your Difficult Feelings to Cultivate Lasting Confidence, Resilience, and Authenticity. Dr. Rosenberg, thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
Well, I am eager to jump into this conversation because in reading about you and in reading 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, I enjoy the fact that you bring neuroscience into the equation to get us to where we want to be.
Yeah, the whole approach actually started from my contact with Dan Siegel, who's very well known for his what people call interpersonal neurobiology, or what he initially called that. And I had a chance to study with him for 10 or 12 years in small groups and that sort of thing. And I was very, very influenced by neuroscience. So it's for me, it's the kind of lays the foundation or the groundwork for the initial part of the approach. It's the grounding for the approach.
And when we talk about the approach and the foundation of feeling confident or at home in our own skin, talk about the formula that you have developed to help people achieve this.
Well, let me give a touch of background on it at first, just to provide context, and I think it'll make more sense then. And so for me, as a child, the first question I wrestled with, because of how shy I was and other aspects was that I wanted to understand how it was that someone developed confidence because I didn't have it. And as I got into my professional life as a psychologist, the second question that kind of I began to wrestle with or be challenged by was what made it so difficult for people to deal with unpleasant feelings. And it turns out, I mean, people struggle with kind of how and what they think, but we also struggle with how we handle our feelings. And what I found is that what I found is that people had more difficulty dealing with their feelings than they did, and that caused more damage, if you will, and made life more difficult than if they were thinking poorly or had faulty thinking.
Let's talk about feelings for 1 second, because as a fellow human and having contact with a lot of humans, I think most of us would agree that the one thing that we really dislike is feeling badly or the sense of discomfort. You know, we are so adverse to experiencing bad things, and yet it is a certainty if we're alive.
Yes, absolutely. It is part of the definition of us. Is, you know, Susan David, who's another psychologist, likes to say the desire to have no feelings are the wishes of dead people.
Ooh, that's a good one.
So it's right. In fact, what I have found is that our experience, our capacity to allow ourselves to feel fully, really is the essence of aliveness. So it's our capacity to actually feel that brings the sensation of being fully alive or aliveness.
And sometimes those feelings that we attach a negative title to, you know, sadness or anger or frustration or whatever, also can sort of have this other side, this sort of inverted theory of twisted beauty to them too. And I hope that's making sense what I'm saying.
Yes, it does. I mean, if we think about grief, which for me is comprised of sadness, helplessness, anger, and disappointment.
Yeah.
There are many that would that understand grief as kind of unfinished love.
Yes.
Or some kind of unfinished investment.
Because in order to feel the grief, we're highly invested in the situation or the relationship or that dynamic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So right. So it's love unrealized or the investment unrealized.
And when we go back to talking about feelings, the sensation of feelings,
right.
and sort of teasing out a feeling from a fact, because oftentimes we mush them together.
Mm-hmm.
How would you guide us to be able to feel more fully and not necessarily get so twisted up in the feeling that we become paralyzed by it?
Well, you can think of feelings and thoughts first as kind of activities of the mind.
Yes.
One of the things you can do is to understand that when you're feeling and when you're thinking, you can think of it almost as if you're watching a movie in a movie theater or you're watching it on your screen, and that what you're allowing yourself to do is to be an observer to the experiences you're having. So you can have the experience, and the beauty of our capacity as humans is we also have the ability to think about our thinking or to think about our feeling. So, which is called metacognition. And so the beauty is that you can step back and go, all right, well, now let me observe what I just went through. And so that you can step back and go, what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling are not permanent.
Yes.
And so I can reflect on what I'm thinking. I can reflect on what I'm feeling or experiencing, and I can make other decisions or do other things with it once I have that awareness. So we actually have to be able to step back a step to be able to observe the experience and then go from there. So that nothing that we think or nothing that we feel necessarily has to be permanent.
I like this practice. Having utilized it myself quite a bit,
right?
It does work, but it does take practice with the practice in order to kind of bifurcate the feeling from being wedded to the story.
Right. Yes, there's a lot to unpack there. But if I give a very simple visual, imagine you placing a piece of paper on the floor And you're sitting in a chair, you're looking down at the piece of paper. Now, the piece of paper represents you being in the experience. So if you were on the floor, then, and with that piece of paper, you were in the experience. But the moment you sit in the chair and you look down at that piece of paper, now you have the capacity to reflect on the experience.
Which is, very empowering, actually.
Yeah. Well, that for me is the first point of change.
Yeah. I'm with you. I get it.
Right. So our awareness is that first point of change. But we also have the capacity to think about our thinking or to reflect on our reflecting. So now let's say I get up and I stand behind the chair. I can look at me sitting in the chair and I can look at the experience. And that's another point of change.
Yeah.
So when we allow ourselves to reflect on and be aware of what we're experiencing, how we're thinking, what we're feeling, how we're behaving, then all of those then become points of change.
And perhaps the commitment to non-attachment to the observation.
Right, exactly. Not judging it. So, but I also want to circle back to your initial question to me that had to do with the reset, the Rosenberg reset.
Yes.
And what to do with feelings. So I want to go back and say, first off, that I never call unpleasant feelings or uncomfortable feelings or difficult feelings bad or negative, because these kinds of feelings actually exist for us as they're protective in nature. So there's nothing bad about them, and there's nothing negative about them. It's for me, it's like, let them be uncomfortable or unsettling or unsomething, but don't call them bad or negative, because they're there for your protection. And if I kind of jump into the to the reset, what I was trying to do was to answer that question about what made it so difficult for people to deal with unpleasant feelings. And if I walk us through 3 or 4 different things here, it'll take us to something that people can apply immediately. And that is understanding first that we're an interconnected whole. Kind of obvious, but the brain is always feeding information to the body, and the body's always feeding information to the brain. So we're actually way more interconnected than some of us would like to allow.
Yes.
The second is to understand that most of us come to know what we feel emotionally through bodily sensation. And the example that I always like to use here is the experience of embarrassment. So if you were to look at me, you might see that my face turned red or my neck turned red or whatever it might be, because all this blood rushed to that part of my body. And I'm going to feel the heat in my face and that of the bodily sensation of that blood rushing there. And so I know by the heat in my face and through experience over time that I've attached this word embarrassment to that experience. And now I know that the signal for me to know that I'm embarrassed, which happens like instantaneously, like nanoseconds, that is that I'm embarrassed when I feel that experience. So, but it's again circling back to this idea that most of us come to know what we feel emotionally is through those bodily sensations. And what dawned on me here is that it wasn't that people didn't want to feel the full range of what they felt. It's that they didn't want to feel the bodily sensations that help them know what they feel. So the key here, it's like twisting it just a little bit or looking at it from a slightly different perspective. And it's not about the feeling, it's about the bodily sensation that's what we try to distract from.
Which is the physical discomfort.
Correct.
I was not certain I knew where you were going, but now I get it. And I think I understand.
So then all the reasons that people back away from feeling emotionally, in my mind, is mostly tied to the effort to not feel the bodily discomfort that is attached to the feeling.
We are going to need to take a break. And when we come back, we are going to continue the conversation with Dr. Joan Rosenberg. We're talking about 90 seconds to a life you love, how to master your difficult feelings to cultivate lasting confidence, resilience, and authenticity. To learn more, you can find Dr. Joan Rosenberg at drjoanrosenberg.com, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Dr. Joan Rosenberg. And when we return, we will continue to learn about the Rosenberg Reset.
Who says money can't buy happiness? Whether you are a skeptic or seeker, check out Lisa's new book. Are we happy yet? 8 Keys to Unlocking a Joyful Life. A boot camp manual for greater emotional fitness is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, IndieBound, and HarvestingHappiness.com. Here's a truth bomb. Emotions are contagious, and happiness is a universally desired state. But we tend to forget that we all have the freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable each day, regardless of external circumstances. Explore the journey of human happiness, how to find it and keep it, with Lisa's documentary film, H Factor. Where is your heart? Visit HarvestingHappiness.com to learn more.
And we're back, continuing the conversation with Dr. Joan Rosenberg. We're talking about psychological fitness and managing our minds. Let's get back to it. We're talking about the Rosenberg Reset and how to work with feelings that we have, how they feel in our bodies, the visceral response to those feelings, and our aversion as human beings to those uncomfortable feelings because of where they rest in our body.
Right. So then again, the most important thing here is to understand that what we don't want to feel are those bodily sensations. And yet what I was doing throughout much of my career was telling people to ride the wave, ride the wave, ride the wave. And what I hadn't realized initially is that I was intuitively correct without the neuroscience. But once I understood the neuroscience, it was like, oh, we're riding bodily sensation waves of these unpleasant feelings. So this takes us to the 90 seconds part. And the 90 seconds element is actually something that Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, author of My Stroke of Insight, wrote about, and is an observation she made as she was dealing with the effects of her stroke. And that was that when a feeling was triggered, that there was a rush of biochemicals into the bloodstream that activated the bodily sensations we've been talking about. And those same biochemicals would flush out of the bloodstream in roughly an upper limit of 90 seconds. So what I want people to understand is that the way that you can lean into and allow yourself to experience and move through feelings, again, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, is first to understand that they're transient. We're talking about roughly this upper limit of 90 seconds, any given wave. But that the way to then lean into these feelings is to ride one or more, and I'm going to emphasize the more here, to ride one or more short-lived bodily sensation waves in order to lean into feelings. And if you're someone who's avoided unpleasant feelings, then the thing here is to experiment, and just go, all right, 90 seconds. Yeah, that sounds like
we can endure it. We can do it.
Right. Most people's reaction is, I can at 90 seconds, I can do 90 seconds, because it feels doable. But what you'll find is that typically it's less than 90 seconds for any given bodily sensation wave. And where it's more, it's because there might be something that's more intense reaction, or there might be some tragic or trauma kind of thing. So that so when I'm talking about tragedy or trauma, I'm gonna shift those over and say that encodes in the brain differently. And so that what we're talking about here has more to do with kind of everyday experiences. And so that the idea here is you absolutely want to be able to ride these short-lived bodily sensation waves in order to lean into the feeling. And what feelings am I talking about? It would be the feelings of sadness, shame, helplessness, anger, vulnerability, embarrassment, disappointment, and frustration. Those are I always talk about, so the formula is kind of 1 choice, 8 feelings, 90 seconds. And the 1 choice is, I want you to choose into awareness as opposed to avoidance. The second part is the 8 feelings that I've just mentioned. The third part is the 90-second idea, and that has to do with riding those short-lived bodily sensation waves. The moment you experiment with it, I think what you'll start to find is that organically, you'll start to feel kind of a natural lift, a natural buoyancy, because now you're allowing yourself to experience more fully the truth of who you are, and that brings with it a better sense of congruence and kind of a natural lift because of it.
And as you're speaking, the words that come to mind is being hyper-focused, like for those 90 seconds that we're really drilling down to what is present.
Mm-hmm.
And after this wave has passed, there's my sense is, in going through it as you're speaking, that there's a lift, that things just lift.
Right. There's a sense of relief and a sense of calm, internal calm, and so I wouldn't say that you actually have to be hyper focused. You just have to. I would say you think of stubbing your toe, right? There's pain initially. You kind of go, and then maybe you grab your toe, and then within a short period of time, it seems to relieve itself. We're talking about the emotional equivalent of that.
Yes.
Right, and so you have an emotional reaction to something, and so breathe into it. Just take some deep, slow breaths, and the breathing will allow you to experience it more fully. Stay in an aware, kind of a gentle, aware place. That I'm going through this. What am I reacting to? What triggered me?
Yeah.
So then you can kind of let those thoughts emerge as you settle into the feelings. And then you'll find the feeling passes, and you can get the benefit of the reflection.
You mentioned something about how trauma is encoded differently in the brain.
Right.
And I would love for you to describe a little bit more about that, because many of us can say, okay, those 8 feelings, those 8 sensations that you described, I can definitely ride that wave for the 90 seconds. But what about all this other material that I'm holding on to?
Well, so there's two big things for me with that. So the amygdala gets involved in a way different than when there's tragedy and trauma, because that's really tied to the fight-flight experience.
Yeah.
So when there's danger and life threat, then the brain is working differently in an effort to help your survival reactions, or what we call the stress reaction, the fight, flight, faint, or freeze reaction, to kick in to protect you. So it's just having an understanding that there are different aspects of the brain, or different structures of the brain is a better way to say it. There's different structures of the brain that kick in when there's life threat, danger, tragedy, and trauma. So that's the important thing to really keep in mind here. And if I go back to the 8 feelings, can those be involved in tragedy or traumatic responses? Of course they can, which means some aspect of that can be helped by this approach. But what I want to say is that it wasn't designed to deal with tragedy and trauma. It was designed to help people deal with everyday kinds of reactions to things.
Understood.
That's really the distinction I want to make. The second part of it for me is that when somebody's had difficult life experiences, I talk about in chapter 8 of the book, there's something I call disguised grief, or we can call it straight out grief in certain cases. That there's a whole way to, I believe, to approach making sense of these difficult life experiences so that they don't no longer have the same hold on you as they did before.
Got it. I want to talk a little bit about anxiety, because many of us struggle with sort of everyday fear and anxiety, fear of change, fear of the unknown. Certainly, the world has been through a very anxious period the last couple of years. There's an application for your work in managing anxiety, and I would love for you to take us through that process.
Well, for me, it's kind of fun. So even though I don't think of anxiety as fun, but and most people don't.
But that reframe, that's part of it.
So here's the thing. I have probably 3 or 4 different ways that I look at anxiety. And the first is to understand that for me, anxiety is trying to have mastery over feelings before they've occurred.
Ooh, I like that.
So you're having so anxiety is related to the future.
Anticipatory angst.
Yeah. So that one of the ways for you to consider is that you're trying to have mastery over feelings you don't want to experience. You're trying to have mastery over those feelings before they've occurred. Yep. And so that's part of what anxiety is about.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, okay. The second way I look at anxiety is that anxiety acts as a cover over those 8 unpleasant feelings. The reality is that if I were to ask 10 people what anxiety meant to them, I would typically get 8 to 10 different answers, which means that anxiety as a concept, to me as a psychologist, has almost no meaning. And what I found is that if to use your word earlier, if I drilled down a little bit, what I found is that people would then start to describe one or more of those 8 unpleasant feelings. And so now the use of the word anxiety, because I think anxiety and fear are typically overused and misused, now the use of that word had no meaning, and it was really one or more of those unpleasant feelings. So now the effort was to get someone to experience and move through those unpleasant feelings. The third way I look at anxiety is that it is unexperienced and unexpressed feeling.
Uh-huh.
So and there's a story that I tell in the book, and it has to do with 2 graduate students that were in a group with me who were talking about how anxious they felt. And what I did is I said, look, are you willing to play? They said yes. I said, so I'm going to take all the words that relate to anxiety away from you, and I want you to tell me what you're really feeling.
This is fun.
They went to scared and apprehensive. I said neither of those count because they're too close to anxiety. And so after that, they kind of smiled a little bit, and one said sad and the other said angry. I said, great. I said, now, so I had them think of an experience that made them anxious first, or they would typically describe the anxiety, and took the words away. Then they got to sadness and anger. And then I said, now go back to that situation where there was sadness and anger, and respectively, and now tell me what you noticed. Was the anxiety still present? And of course it wasn't. It was that they were sad and they were angry. Living the real experience, the anxiety goes away.
Yes. So anxiety can be seen as sort of the buffer or the bumper.
Yes, absolutely. It's easier for me to describe me being anxious than actually living the truth of what I'm experiencing. Yeah. So then one step further, because this will add to people being able to use it, is then I said, was there anybody else involved? And of course they said yes. And I said, did you happen to tell them that you were sad or angry? And they said no. And then they had big smiles on their faces, realizing that the anxiety was coming out of not allowing themselves to experience what they really experienced, in this case, sadness and anger, respectively, and then also not telling the truth of what that experience was in a situation that was relevant for that to be heard. So that's why I think of anxiety as also the unexperienced and unexpressed feeling.
We are out of time, but we are not out of things to talk about, which means that you will have to come back.
Okay,
we'll have to hang out and do more, because what I love about the Rosenberg Reset and your work is it gives people sort of rapid response, self first aid.
Absolutely. Actually, the reality is every aspect of my work is, while it's very conceptual, it is also very practical. And the beauty is you hear it once, you actually have the opportunity to apply it immediately.
Yes. Go out and test drive.
Exactly.
That is the challenge.
Experiment, be curious, test drive.
To learn more, please visit drjoanrosenberg.com. You can find her on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Dr. Joan Rosenberg. We've been talking about 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, how to master your difficult feelings to cultivate lasting confidence, resilience, and authenticity. And this conversation is to be continued. Thanks, Dr. Rosenberg.
You bet. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of my guests, Dr. Gregory S. Brown and Dr. Joan Rosenberg, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day, and remember to be kind to one another.
Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime and anywhere, from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes via our free app or from our libraries at toginet.com, iTunes, Google Play, and other fine podcast platforms. To learn more about Lisa's global consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Spread more joy by liking us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and following Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen. Harvesting Happiness is produced in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU Radio Malibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.